All right, sources tell CBS News that President Trump asked a group of House Republicans if he should fire Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. You heard him talk about that during his meeting there with the Crown Prince of Bahrain. Now, he addressed the report in the Oval Office moments ago, and he took shots at Powell. Listen.
He should have cut interest rates a long time ago. Europe has cut them 10 times in the short period of time, and we cut them none. The only time he cut him was just before the election to try and help Kamala or Biden, whoever the hell it was, because nobody really knew. He's a terrible Fed chair. I was surprised he was appointed. I was surprised, frankly, that Biden put him in and extended him, but they did. So, no, we're not planning on doing anything.
Okay, I want to bring in CBS News congressional reporter Taurean Small. Taurean, what are you hearing about this supposed meeting with the GOP lawmakers that happened? And would it even be possible to fire Powell?
Yeah, so on the latter part of that question, Mugo, that's what's the point of contention, which is probably why we're hearing the president not going too far and confirming whether or not he would actually move forward with firing him, which is why he floated the idea of maybe looking into any offense committed by Powell before he moves forward with that part of the discussion. But sources have been telling CBS, these are people who were in the room with the president, that he pretty much corroborating what he said in that Oval Office meeting or press conference just now, that he talked or floated this idea, wanted to really bounce it off of them. Nothing really definitive, though, and the president again confirmed that he had these conversations, but no immediate action, at least in his mind, was on the table at this point, Mugo.
And Taurean, I want to ask you about the whole Jeffrey Epstein situation, because it just seems like it's not going away. So House Speaker Mike Johnson is calling for transparency in the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files. Is this a surprising move, and could it affect his relationship with the president, because they seem like they're close?
Yeah, I do want to caution and say that Speaker Johnson, even though he did in an interview with a conservative podcaster, commentator, said that he is open to any type of transparency. He didn't break from the president on this. He previously said that he supports the president and Attorney General Pam Bondi on this, but he is publicly facing, at least saying that he's open to that. And he was purposefully vague about what that could mean. And Benny Johnson, the person that he talked to, that conservative commentator, followed up in another interview separate from him, saying that he pressed on what this could mean. Would he authorize a subpoena or Congress testimony from Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's madam or partner there? And he didn't receive any answers on this. This, as there are quite a few House Republicans who are on the fence about this, if not completely upset at the president from seemingly doing an about-face on this. Members of the House Freedom Caucus were looking for answers sooner than later. So again, this is Speaker Johnson in between his conference and the White House and looking to toe the line to not upset either side here.
It's a good way to put it. So last night, the Senate advanced President Trump's request to cancel billions of dollars in foreign aid and public media funding. With Vice President J.D. Vance, he was the one who issued the tie-breaking vote. What concerns are you hearing from lawmakers when it comes to this package?
Well, it seems like since then, OMB Director Russell Vought has met with members of the Republican Party in the Senate who have any long-standing or outstanding reservations about this bill, seemingly in an effort to assuage any concerns that they have. What we've heard so far is about the cuts to public broadcasting. So Missouri or South Dakota Senator Mike Rounds came out and said that he had some issues with the impact on tribal public broadcasting. After a conversation he had with the White House, after a conversation he had with Russell Vought, he says that he believes that an amendment could be introduced that would ensure that that won't be touched. We then have concerns about potential cuts to this George W. Bush era program that really targeted AIDS prevention and resources around the globe. This was a concern we heard from Susan Collins of Maine. According to the OMB director, an amendment should be introduced that would also make sure that that is protected from any cuts moving forward. There are still members of the conference like Lisa Murkowski and Mitch McConnell who have concerns with this bill. This is a numbers game though, Mugo. So if more than 3 Republicans defect, then this bill is essentially dead. But it appears, based on the procedural vote that we saw, that Republicans do have the numbers to push this out of their chamber and potentially back to the president's desk before that Friday deadline.
All right, we shall see what happens. Taurean Small, live on Capitol Hill for us today. Thank you so much for your time.